In the previous demos I showed you how to configure Eclipse. That is to get the Tomcat down, to get CXF set up correctly. Now I'm going to show you how to write a web service in Eclipse. Now we're going to start by creating a complete new project. So select File, then New, and then Dynamic Web Project. This brings up the new Dynamic Web Project wizard. We have a few things here we need to configure. We need to configure the project name, we need to configure which the web module version we want to use, and we also need to configure which web service runtime to use. I'll call the project Deep Thought Web Service, or Deep Thought WS. Then we'll change the dynamic web module version. I'll use the more mature spec, the 2.5 version. We also need to set up the configuration. In the drop-down, select CXF Web Service Project. That's all we need to set up. Now press Finish. Eclipse now has created a new project called Deep Thought WS. And I will open that project and write a web service. First I need to create the Java implementation, and I'm going to do so by right-clicking on the Java Resources Source tab, select New, Class, which will create a new Java class. This brings up the standard new class wizard in Eclipse. I'll start by specifying the package. I'll name the package com-sizepack.ws. Next I'll give the class a name. I'll name the class Deep Thought, and then press Finish. I should point out at this point that this is just a standard Java class, and I'll just make a simple implementation. It's a simple method called whatIsTheAnswer, and it returns a string and takes a string. When someone calls the method whatIsTheAnswer on Deep Thought, we want it to answer with a string. And the answer, as you probably know, is 42. So we'll implement this by concatenating three pieces. One is the answer, the second the interviewer, and then is 42. I'll save the file. Now let's add a web service. We're going to use the class we just implemented and wrap a web service around it. There are many ways in Eclipse to do this, but I'm going to use the toolbar New option and select Web Service. This brings up a multi-page wizard. I'm not going to go through every option on this wizard, but I'm going to step you through the essential pages, and we're going to just do the minimum we need to make the web service work. The first thing we have to do is to pick the service implementation. Now notice in my case that Deep Thought has already been selected, but that might not be the case in your case, so I'm going to show you how you can browse to the service implementation by clicking the Browse button. This brings up the standard Browse Classes dialog in Eclipse, and we can start typing the name of the class that we want to select. And when you can see the class in the matching items area, you can double click on it. Eclipse has a fairly non-intuitive dialog here, but if you take the sliders and drag them all the way to the top, that is the sliders on the left hand side, that means you want to generate everything. Make sure you move the slider both on the client and on the server part. Although not strictly necessary, I'm going to check the Monitor the Web Service box. Then let's move to the next page. Select Use a Service Endpoint Interface, and also select Create an Service Endpoint Interface in the radio button. Check the method. Then let's give the interface a name. We'll call it Deep Thought SEI. Then let's go to the next page. This page allows me to configure the annotations in Java. I'm going to skip this and go to the next page. The following pages contains a set of configuration where we're just going to pick the default. Here, for instance, is the WSDL file, and you can also specify the SOAP binding. Now to see that everything worked out okay, let's start up the server. We can do so by clicking on the Start Server button on the middle of the page. When the server has started, the button should be grayed out, and we can now press Next. On this page we specify that we want to test the web service using something called the Web Service Explorer. As we press Next, a progress dialog will come up where we're starting up the Web Service Explorer. We'll wait for that to finish. This page allows us to specify binding files. Now we don't need that in this case, so we'll press Next. And here are some more advanced options. Again, the defaults would do just fine. Let's press next. We're really not going to set up anything more, but the next page is basically saying, do we want to test using the Web Service Explorer right now? And we're at the final page where we can press finish. Now we really could have pressed finish a long time ago, but I just wanted to show you all the pages. Eclipse now launches the Web Service Explorer, which is a reflective Explorer that allows me to test out any web service actually, and it will list all the method names on the services, and as we'll see, it allows us to invoke the service. And we can see that the web service have been found, and there is a link for the method what's the name, and we'll click on it. arg0 is the interviewer in our interface. We're going to click on add so we can specify a parameter before we invoke the web service. This brings up a text box where I can type in the name. I'll type in Peter. And then I'll click Go, which will actually invoke the web service. And now I want to inspect what the result was. And we can see that the web service returned the answer, Peter is 42, which is what we would expect. That's good. The Web Service Explorer allowed us to invoke our service. We know it's correctly deployed, and we know it works properly. Now let's take a look at some of the other code and see if we can invoke a web service from plain Java. One of the things we specified when we created the web service was that we wanted to create a plain Java client. And we're going to open that project now. Eclipse generated some code that we can find under the source directory and in the package com.scipike.ws. Now all the code that is required to access our web service have been generated in this package. I'll open the code that demonstrates this and maximize the code window so we can see what we're doing. Now this generated code illustrates how you can access the web service. I'll just change the argument to Peter. It is a dummy implementation, but say you wanted to access a web service from a Swing application, or say from a Eclipse rich client, you could easily do this, and you can look at this code and get inspired by it if you want, because it shows you everything you need to do to invoke the service. I'll save my changes and restore the window size. To run the standalone client, I'll right click inside the file, select Run As, and then Java Application. The server is already running and the web service is deployed, so this will start up a second process that will connect to the web service. Well, that executed nicely, and I got some result in the console window. And we can then see the result. There are a few other messages here, but they come from the logging. And the result is what we expected. So Deep Thought is now deployed and working just perfectly. And that concludes the demo of how to create the web service in Eclipse.